We are told that in the beginning, the earth was without form and void, a dark, empty, watery chaos waiting for the voice of God. But what if that darkness wasn't the silence of an empty stage waiting for the play to begin? What if it was the silence of a ruin? The aftermath of a catastrophe so complete it reset time itself. For generations we have read these words as the dawn of all things. But what if they describe an end, not a beginning? Buried within sealed rabbinic traditions and cryptic verses in Jeremiah and Isaiah lies a staggering possibility that our world is not the first. That before Adam ever took a breath, another world existed on this very planet. A world teeming with life, ruled not by man, but by the highest of God's angelic beings. This is not a mere theological debate. The implications are profound, touching the very nature of God's justice, the depth of angelic rebellion, and the sacred ground on which we stand. It suggests a history was deliberately erased, a truth so overwhelming that the earliest scribes may have concealed it to protect mankind from a story of a failure too great to comprehend. A story of God's original masterpiece, and the divine judgment that wiped it clean. What you are about to discover is a truth that has been hidden in plain sight, whispered between the lines of Scripture for millennia. We invite you to journey with us, to look past the veil of tradition and see what was forgotten. Because the story of the world before Adam is also the story of why our world had to be created in the first place. The story begins with a question that is almost never asked in Sunday school. We read in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2 that the earth was without form and void. We accept this as the starting point. But the original Hebrew words, tohu v'abohu, carry a much heavier meaning. They don't just mean empty, they mean a ruin, a desolation, a wasteland. Why would a God of perfect order begin his glorious creation with a scene of utter chaos and ruin? It doesn't sound like a beginning, it sounds like an end. This feeling, this subtle inconsistency, is echoed in a place most people never look for a connection to Genesis. The prophet Jeremiah, lamenting a future judgment from God, uses the exact same ancient phrase. In Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 23, he says, "I beheld the earth, and indeed it was without form and void." He is describing the aftermath of a divine verdict, a world laid waste. So the question we must ask is this: why does the Bible's first chapter use the specific language of catastrophic judgment to describe the first day of creation? This is where a truth, long concealed by tradition, begins to surface. A truth that suggests Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 and Genesis chapter 1 verse 2 are not describing the same event. What if they describe two different ages, separated by an unimaginable cataclysm? The first verse describes a perfect, original creation. The second describes its wreckage. We are not looking at the blueprint of our world, but at the rubble of another. If you feel the weight of this revelation, consider joining our community by subscribing, as we uncover more of these forgotten truths together. This lost world was not a void. It was a vibrant kingdom, a physical domain ruled by the most powerful and beautiful of all God's angelic creations. It was a world of light, life, and glory that existed long before Adam, but a shadow fell upon it. A prideful rebellion born in the heart of its angelic king led to a war so devastating it forced God to erase an entire chapter of his own creation. The evidence of this is not just in the words of a prophet, it's found in the identity of the being who caused it all. But what was his name before he fell? And what was the sin so terrible that God chose to bury a world rather than let its memory survive? To answer that, we must look beyond the familiar pages of our Bibles into ancient texts that were preserved for centuries in secret. Texts like the Book of Enoch and the Midrashim, ancient Jewish commentaries, speak of this angelic ruler not as a serpent but as a being of immense light and authority. They whisper of a name that was erased from history, a name that meant light-bearer. This was not some distant ethereal spirit. He was the anointed guardian of a physical world, God's first Eden. These ancient writings are not separate stories. They are the missing pages from a book we thought we knew. And yet, a shadow of this truth survived, embedded like a fossil in the prophecies of Ezekiel. In chapter 28, the prophet speaks to a human king, but the words transcend any earthly monarch. He describes a being who was in Eden, the garden of God, a cherub who covers. Imagine this, a creature of unimaginable splendor, walking in the midst of the stones of fire on God's holy mountain. This wasn't a description of the serpent in Adam's garden. This was a portrait of the King of the world that came before, a memory of his perfection before iniquity was found in him. The story was never fully erased, only veiled. Why would such a profound truth be hidden? Because the nature of his sin was more terrifying than simple pride. Ancient traditions suggest his rebellion was not just a celestial war, but a terrestrial one. He sought to corrupt the physical creation he was given to rule, to fill it with his own life, his own glory, twisting it into a mirror of himself instead of God. The judgment that followed was not just punishment, it was a purification. A divine act of erasure so complete that God had to flood the world and cover it in darkness, burying the evidence of a rebellion that had scarred the very soil of the earth. But when God wiped the slate clean, what happened to the inhabitants of that first world? The cataclysm that brought forth the tohu via bohu, the ruin and the void, did more than just destroy a kingdom. It created a prison. The waters that covered the deep were not just waters of chaos. They were walls, holding back the remnants of that corrupted age. And the spirits that fell with their king were not cast into a distant hell, but were bound to the very world they had defiled. They became the silent, unseen watchers of the new world to come, a world they would immediately seek to destroy. This makes the creation of Adam in Genesis chapter 2 an act of profound defiance. When God formed man from the dust of the ground, what dust was he using? It was not new soil. It was the consecrated ash of a judged world. Adam was sculpted from the very remnants of the rebellion, a new creation rising from the ruins of the old. This is why the Garden of Eden had to be planted and guarded. It was a holy sanctuary, a beachhead of divine order, established on a planet that was, in its very essence, a spiritual tomb. This hidden history changes the entire context of Adam's temptation. The serpent was not merely a cunning beast. He was the dethroned king of the pre-Adamic world, returning to the scene of his ancient crime. He saw Adam, a creature of dust, given the dominion he had lost. His temptation of Eve was not a simple act of jealousy. It was an attempt to regain his lost kingdom by corrupting the new heir. The unseen war had never ended. It had simply been waiting for a new battlefield and a new soldier. Think of the spiritual weight of this omission. We are taught that sin entered a perfect world. But this forgotten truth suggests that Adam was placed in a reclaimed Danip world, a world already haunted by the ghosts of a primordial failure. The command not to eat from the tree was not just a test of obedience. It was a test of loyalty in a world already divided between two kingdoms. Hiding this truth protected humanity from a terrifying reality, but it also veiled the true scale of the spiritual conflict we were born into. It is a story of a war that began long before we did. But in this revelation we see the infinite sovereignty of God. He did not abandon the ruined earth. He repurposed it. He took the very ground that had been defiled by the highest of angels and chose it as the stage for his ultimate plan of redemption through mankind. The creation of Adam was God's answer to the first rebellion. It was a declaration that his purpose would not be thwarted by darkness or failure. He built his new beginning directly upon the ashes of the end, proving that his power is not just in creating, but in redeeming the deepest of ruins. This is why the story you learned in Sunday school feels so different, so much simpler. For centuries, we have been handed a linear narrative. God created a perfect world, man sinned, and redemption was needed. It is a powerful truth, but it is an incomplete one. The version we have uncovered tonight speaks not of a blank slate, but of a slate wiped clean. It suggests the ground beneath our feet is not just holy, but haunted, a divine crime scene that was intentionally scrubbed from the official record. So the question we must dare to ask is why? Why would a truth of this magnitude be concealed? The answer is not one of malice, but perhaps one of fear. Imagine the early church fathers, men shaping the bedrock of doctrine for millennia to come. In an era of rampant paganism and the worship of fallen powers, they held a story that could be dangerously misunderstood. A story of a world once ruled by an angel king, a being of light who became the architect of darkness. It was a truth deemed too overwhelming, a history so terrifying it might shatter the faith of the masses rather than strengthen it. This was not a casual oversight. Decisions were made. In the great councils, where the canon of Scripture was debated and doctrines were forged in fire, a choice was presented. Do we reveal the full, complex, and terrifying scope of the cosmic war that predates humanity? Or do we present a simpler, more contained narrative of creation and fall, one that protects believers from a truth they may not be prepared to handle? The silence of the pulpits on this subject is the echo of a decision made long ago, to bury the memory of the first world, but in protecting us, they left us vulnerable. By erasing the story of the world before Adam, they also obscured the true identity and motive of our enemy. They told us about the serpent in the garden, but they failed to tell us he was a dethroned king returning to the ruins of his former kingdom. He wasn't just tempting Adam, he was attempting to seize back the dominion he had lost. And this forgotten detail doesn't just add to the story of Genesis, it completely redefines the war we are still fighting today. This changes everything. It means the war we fight is not just about our sin, but about a throne that was vacated before we ever existed. The enemy's hatred for humanity is not random. It is the calculated vengeance of a deposed monarch against the heir who replaced him. But even this is not the most shocking revelation. Because we have only spoken of the king, we have not yet asked about the subjects of his kingdom. And there is something here that almost nobody dares to say. The Bible tells us God created the animals and beasts of our world during the 6 days of restoration. But what about the life that existed in that first world, the one ruled by the cherub king? Was it a world inhabited only by angels? Or did it teem with other forms of life, beings whose existence was erased in the great cataclysm of judgment? Ancient traditions, fragments of forgotten lore, speak of this. They whisper of a world filled not with creatures of flesh and blood, but with beings of a different substance. Beings that were corrupted alongside their king, their forms twisted by his rebellion. The flood of judgment that brought the asterisk tohu va bohu did not just destroy a landscape, it annihilated an entire biosphere that was unholy. If this search for hidden truth resonates with your spirit, consider sharing this video with someone you know who is also seeking answers beyond the surface. This is the question that haunts the deepest corners of theology. When God wiped the slate clean, did every trace of that first kingdom vanish, or did something remain? Not angels, but the disembodied spirits of what once lived here, trapped between the old world and the new. What if the demonic spirits the Gospels speak of are not all fallen angels, but are also the tormented, homeless souls of a pre-Adamic race, forever bound to a world that is no longer theirs? This revelation forces us to look at Scripture not as a simple history book, but as a divine legal document. The destruction of that first world was a verdict, a judgment executed. The creation of Adam was therefore a legal and spiritual reclamation. God was not just making a man, he was establishing a new Adam, a new federal head, to lawfully retake a dominion that had been forfeited by rebellion. Our entire purpose on this earth is rooted in this cosmic succession. This hidden truth does not diminish the story of Adam's fall, it magnifies it. He was not just a gardener who failed a simple test. He was a king, placed on a throne built upon the ruins of a fallen monarch's kingdom, and he was given a command that was, in essence, an oath of allegiance. His failure was not just disobedience, it was treason. He unwittingly handed the keys to the kingdom back to the very entity from whom God had reclaimed it. Knowing this doesn't weaken your faith. It gives it a foundation of solid rock. It reveals that God's plan of redemption through Jesus Christ was not a reaction to Adam's sin, but the eternal answer to the original rebellion. Christ is not just the second Adam who redeems humanity. He is the ultimate king who reclaims the dominion lost by both the angelic ruler and the first man. The cross was planted on ground that was already a battlefield, making his victory a triumph over an evil far older than we are. This understanding changes how we see the world around us. The spiritual warfare we face is not a new conflict. It is the continuation of a primordial war over the ownership of this planet. But the story is not over. The judgment that created the tohu v'abohu buried a world. But what if something from that first creation was not entirely destroyed? What if a remnant of its power, a scar from its corruption, was left behind, waiting beneath the soil of the new world? That remnant was not just spiritual, it was physical. Ezekiel's prophecy spoke of the cherub king walking among stones of fire. For millennia, we have read that as a metaphor for a celestial place. But what if it was literal? What if the very foundation of that first world was built from substances we now find deep within our own earth? The diamonds, the crystals, the precious gems that glitter with a light that seems otherworldly. The cataclysm of judgment did not vaporize these foundations. It shattered them, burying the fragments deep beneath the crust of our new world. The scars of that first creation are the jewels of ours. This redefines the entire history of mankind's obsession with earthly treasure. The relentless pursuit of gold, the wars fought over diamonds, the spiritual power attributed to crystals by pagan cultures. What if this is not mere human greed? What if it is a deep subconscious echo, a spiritual pull toward the physical remnants of that first corrupted kingdom? The enemy doesn't just tempt us toward moral failure. He drives us to dig into the earth, to unearth the very relics of his lost dominion, hoping to reassemble the memory of his former glory from the dust of God's judgment. But God's plan is always perfect, always one step ahead of the darkness. The Bible calls Jesus Christ the chief cornerstone, the rock that is higher than any other. This is the ultimate answer to the corrupted foundations of that first world. The cross was not just planted on a hill. It was planted in the soil of a reclaimed planet, declaring a new foundation for a new creation. And in the book of Revelation, we see the New Jerusalem descending, its foundations adorned with every kind of precious stone. This is not a display of wealth. It is a declaration of ultimate victory. God taking the very elements of the first rebellion and using them to build his final, holy, and eternal kingdom. Therefore, the story of the world before Adam is not a footnote to our faith. It is the hidden prologue that reveals the true magnitude of Christ's triumph. It shows us that God's plan of redemption was not a response to one man's sin in a garden, but the eternal answer to a cosmic war that began in the depths of time. The truth was not buried to deceive us, but to be revealed in its proper time, so we could stand in awe of a God whose power is so absolute, he builds his everlasting throne upon the ruins of his enemy's rebellion. If this revelation has stirred your soul, then your journey into the deeper things of God is far from over. Subscribe now and join a community of believers who are not afraid to look into the shadows of the past to see the brilliance of Christ's light more clearly than ever before. This knowledge changes the very architecture of our faith. It shows that God's plan was never a simple linear story. It was a grand cosmic reclamation project. The story of Jesus Christ is not merely God's response to a single act of disobedience in a garden. It is the ultimate answer to a rebellion that shook the foundations of the original creation. This truth doesn't weaken the story of the cross. It places it at the center of a conflict far older and vaster than we ever imagined. There is a reason this hidden history is surfacing now. Perhaps it was intentionally veiled. kept for a generation of believers who would not be satisfied with a faith that remains in the shallow end. You are listening to this because you have felt that pull toward the deep. You knew there had to be more. This truth was not meant for those who are content with simple answers. It was reserved for those with the courage to ask the difficult questions, to look at the ruins of the past, to understand the glory of God's ultimate design. Have you ever wondered why modern faith can sometimes feel so powerless, so disconnected from the raw, supernatural reality of the Scriptures? It is because we have been trying to understand a war, having read only the middle chapters. We have been taught about the fall of man, but not the fall of a world. This missing context is why the enemy's tactics seem so random, and why the spiritual resistance we face feels so deeply entrenched in the very fabric of this world. We have been fighting an ancient king without knowing the history of his throne. But knowing this truth doesn't just illuminate the past, it equips us for the present. It reframes our purpose here on earth. We are not just saved souls waiting for heaven. We are agents of a divine king, tasked with occupying and reclaiming territory in a world that has been a battleground for eons. The struggle is real, because the history is real. But this ancient history holds one final, chilling secret. A secret that explains the nature of the unseen forces that still linger in the shadows of our world. The truth you have heard tonight changes the very ground beneath your feet. It reveals that your life, your faith, and your struggles are not an isolated story, but the climax of a cosmic war that began before the mountains were formed. The victory of Jesus Christ was not simply a remedy for Adam's sin. It was the final, triumphant answer to a rebellion that scarred the original creation. This knowledge is not meant to instill fear, but to inspire awe at the sheer scale of God's eternal plan, a plan in which you play a vital role. For centuries, these truths have remained veiled, whispered only in the margins of ancient texts, intentionally kept from the ears of the faithful. But we are living in a time of revealing, a time when God is pulling back the curtain for those who have the courage to look. The silence is being broken. What was forgotten is now being remembered, not to challenge your faith, but to give it a foundation so deep and so solid that no storm can ever shake it. If this truth burns in your heart, then we ask you to join us in bringing this light out of the darkness. You can begin by leaving a like on this video, subscribing to our channel, and activating the bell so you never miss another revelation. We have also just launched our new members area. By becoming a member, you directly bless this ministry and help us continue producing the deep, edifying content that you are seeking. And finally, we want to hear from you. In the comments below, please write where you are watching from so we can see just how far this incredible truth is reaching hearts around the world. Remember, you are not just a believer living in the modern world. You are an heir to a reclaimed kingdom, a soldier in a victorious army, and a child of the God who builds his eternal throne upon the ruins of ancient darkness.